Hello all, welcome to ScoresHerToys@AnyMoon.com's classic toy review of the CM's 1/18 scale Brave Gokin Ride Armor toys. There were 13 releases in this line, but in this review we're going to narrow down the herd by focusing only on the VR52F and T models, famously used by Stick and Ray in Genesis Climber Mospeada, or Scott and Rand in Robotech The New Generation. These toys haven't been in stores in a long time, and many of these variants were convention exclusives that were never in stores, so this video is for those of you contemplating hunting these down on the secondary market. There are newer Mospeada and Robotech products coming out all the time, so do head on over to Big Bad Toy Store using the link in the comments below to show your support for this channel and scope out the latest merch. This review will also include the writing figure set, and that's where we'll begin. The writing figure set came in unique packaging with a big window that showed you exactly what you were getting, which is important because you weren't getting much. This is the only release that does not include a motorcycle of any sort. Instead, you get 2 rider figures, a nameless soldier and Commander Jonathan. Also in the package are 2 gallants in pistol configuration and 2 pairs of gripping hands which work for either motorcycle handles or those included gallants. There's nothing else included in the set. We are beginning with the riding figure set because these riding figures are the same riders you get for any of the VR52F or T variants, with only differences in the color of their outfits and facial sculpts. So speaking of the facial sculpts, here is a picture that shows you all of the different versions. You can see CMs went out of their way to give us a little bit different faces, a little bit different hair, different colored hair at the very least, to try to switch things up. Even the VR52F general use had a second head with it with different colored hair so it wouldn't be exactly Stick Bernard. Now, these figures have pretty crazy articulation on them, which is very beneficial for this toy overall. The head is a ball joint and it has a swivel inside. And what that allows us to do is put the toy in a position where the rider can look very far up. So if he's riding a motorcycle right now, he can be looking forward. Now you did just see the shoulder armor pop off, and things popping off is going to be a very common theme here. But let's ignore that for now. The shoulders themselves, I can pull this arm out, it is a peg, and you can see within there is a pivot point up and down, which is fantastic. Obviously, since it is a peg, you can spin that whole thing around, and there is a pivot right there as well, so that's all good. Twist right below the shoulder with a double jointed elbow, which is fantastic to see. Now, what's less fantastic is all the screws, but at the same time, given the prevalence of glue on these toys, these screws are a nice reminder that there is a high quality effort going on. Now, the forearms do have the ability to twist as well, which also proves very beneficial when you're in armor mode and you're applying those gauntlets, which is all good. Now, you can see there is a ball joint in the torso region, which lets this pivot back and forward, which is great, and twist all around. That's really your waist as well, so that's where you're going to use that. The hips are a little tricky in that you've got this armor underneath the hip. So what you want to do is rotate the inner portion of the thigh forward, and then that gives you that nice rounded bit. That lets you get a little bit higher up. Now the ball joints within the hips and the knees, as we continue to move down, are sort of angled ball joints, which means if you go to move the knee back at some point and it can't move, you have to twist the leg around to reposition that joint. And you should be able to get at least that far back. So here's your riding position. Let's get that out of the way. There's the knee, and you can come out with it pretty far, which is all good. You can see a big ball joint in the foot, which is concealed by this rather large flap here, but it does allow the foot to go back and forth and up and down, which is great. So you can put these toys in very natural looking poses, and they're very dynamic, and that dynamism is going to continue as you put the toy from riding the motorcycle, where you need a lot of articulation, to then wearing the armor as well. Moving on to the actual ride armors, the VR-52F is the type of armor that has missiles on the gauntlets. The first release was a regular stick version, which was followed by a general use type, a clear metallic type, and finally a dark mosquito type. CM's reused boxes for multiple releases, so check my graphic to ensure you snag the toy you want. Inside the box, you'll get the riding figure and a motorcycle with the rear covers and gauntlets removed. You'll also get a targeting scope for armor mode, a pair of fixed posed hands for gripping the throttle, a motorcycle mode display stand, and a heavy gun with the hand already attached. Behind the toy, you'll find an armor mode display stand and instructions. There were 2 changes that occurred between the first release and the 3 later releases. First, the hand holding the gun on the original release is glued on, albeit poorly, while the later releases come with a hand that can be removed. Second, the first release has a plastic swing arm lock, while the part was metal on the later releases. I've never heard of anyone breaking those plastic locks, but just in case, the first release comes with 2 spare locks in a baggie with the armor mode display stand. If you snagged the dark VR-52F, your toy also came with a gallant and pistol configuration. Similarly, there were also 4 VR-52T variants in the same style and even the same box in many instances. These toys come with all the same stuff as the 52F releases, excluding the heavy gun. The metallic releases of either toy come with a warning you should heed about scratching the helmet during transformation. If you're going to transform the metallic toys, pop the head off and plug it back in after transformation to avoid the issue. The general use 52T was the last release before CM's implemented the metal swing bar locks, so it also includes those 2 plastic locks in the back baggie, as well as a flyer warning you to handle the windscreen with care because, spoiler alert, these toys are crazy fragile. I mentioned this toy comes with saddlebags. The saddlebags are pretty cool. They fit on there sturdy enough. I can handle this toy. They're not popping off at all, which is good. I can pull off the saddlebags and I can open them up. But inside you'll see there's just a big screw that's connecting everything. It's not actually useful storage in any capacity, but this toy is so small, it'd be kind of crazy to expect it would be. Popping off the back ones, it's easy to look at the attachment mechanism and then slide it to the larger opening before you pry that free. Now, one of the issues with this toy from a durability standpoint you're going to want to be concerned with is one side has a metal pin that's coming out from the swing arm, and that goes into this housing on the side. On the other side, it's plastic. On neither side does it really grip well. So if you're sitting there trying to press this in to get it to hold together really well, there's a chance you can break this back plastic pin off. So just get it good enough and then leave it alone because you don't want to break that pin. So here we can pop this off. Now, do you need to remove the saddlebags for transformation? Yes, you do. You don't need to remove the ones on the hip armors. It'll look a little funky if you leave them on, but you can leave them on. But you do have to remove this back one as that peg receives the fuel tank housing as you transform. As you've already seen, you can use the foot pegs to keep your toy pretty much erect, so there's no real need for a bike mode display stand, but that didn't stop CMs from giving us this thing, which I am not terribly fond of. It goes underneath the toy and connects via these 2 pegs on either side and goes on like so. And there you go. So now you have a more completely upright, if it all stays where it's supposed to, which I don't think it did as I spun it around there. But that's the idea. You get the gist. And again, I would just take this thing off, throw it aside. You don't need it. But you might be curious, hey, it's got rubber tires. The wheels look like they spin, and they do. Can I zoom this thing around my room? And the answer to that is not really. Okay, so here it is. It's actually happening. It's happening. It's happening. But it normally doesn't happen. It usually causes, one of these is going to be stiffer than the other or something, and it's going to cause your toy to move around. But on this toy, success, which is wonderful. So it's possible. Just don't bank on it. Here are the VR-52T toys in release order, and you can see pretty quickly that they have issues. And the big issue with these is that the gun and the peg from the fork don't really line up. So what you end up doing if you really want those to line up is you pull your fork out to the side. And in doing that, I've managed to pry the shoulder armor on this to be a little too loose for me. And even when they are connected, it looks funky because that fork is now leaning way off to the side. So what CMs should have done is included a much longer peg for that one side, but instead they just tried to use the same peg that's on the VR52T toys, and it just doesn't work out. Now you can also see I've got the loose headlights here. So I've got this is loose, I've got a peg that won't fit, I've got loose headlights. The windscreen on these toys was notorious for popping off or being popped off already. Since I can't put that peg on, the gun is spinning around, and these foot pegs here, I've had to dip them in glue, that little metal part, and then let that dry so they would stay on with any sort of force at all, because otherwise every time I touched them they would fall off. So handling this has been very frustrating, and it's universal. Even by the time they got to the dark Mospeada, they had not figured out that peg issue, and you can see here it is. I've got the fork in and it's bending it way out, and on this toy I actually managed to crack that piece. So that's actually a broken rod. On the original toy that I first started handling many moons ago, this peg will also just pull right out of the housing, so that little screw that's holding it in place is not really a screw, it's a pin. It might get lost someday and I'll be in a boatload of trouble. What I found with this toy is that I can use that housing up above to pin that rod into position because everything's so tight there. But clearly a disaster in handling these toys. So really it comes down to just a display piece. Get it in the pose you want. It's frustrating to get it in that pose, but once you do, you just kind of walk away slowly with your hands up. One of the cool things about the CM's toys is they were the first to really allow you to put the rider on the motorcycle. They even have a peg that flips up out of the seat to lock the butt of the rider onto the toy. So that's really going to give you a firm grip. I have never once used it, and I'm not going to start using it now, but it's there for those of you who are concerned about that rider moving around at all. Now I've taken the arms off the toy. You would not do that in all likelihood, but I figured you didn't want to watch me fiddling with it. There's a little fat part at the end of the handle, and that makes it so the fist actually stays on that handle pretty securely. I've also got the legs already splayed out, so I can just put the rider on there and turn him around so. And then once he is on, I can peg those arms into position and we will be ready to go. Let's get that up. All right, so here is the really easy, low maintenance way of getting him on the bike, which is fine. Now you would position the legs a little bit better. There is also the option to loop the foot peg through the bottom of the shoe. I don't really know why you would ever feel compelled to do that, but you have that ability, so just FYI, it is there. Now on most of my toys, these foot pegs are pretty loose and fiddly, so I wouldn't recommend doing this, just like I wouldn't recommend using that peg that goes in the butt. You can see I'm knocking my toy askew by even trying to do this, but there we go, got that in there. I would reset my peg in the back here, and you have a figure riding the bike. So that is cool, if not gratuitous amounts of connecting the figure to the bike. It's not like when you ride a motorcycle, you latch yourself to the motorcycle. There it goes. Okay, so there he is on there. You can get him into much more natural looking poses, but he doesn't look unnatural at all like this. So high marks there for CMs for finally giving us a pretty natural rider on the Cyclone or ride armor. One of the really cool aspects of these toys is that they can do a storage mode and a armor but not on a rider mode, which is really cool. You can see this is all one piece right now. I've got the gauntlets attached to the forks, I've got the hip armors curled up, and that is a very tight storage area to throw in the Legios. Then you've got this is the armor in its actual armor configuration. Ray next to it could just throw that on right now, theoretically. The only bummer is you have to use an aftermarket display stand like that Fexed Hobby utility display stand to actually accomplish this. The little twig they include will not get you there. But these are cool options for you and your display case. Do check out my separate transformation guide to see how to get to armor mode. Once you're here, you will admire the fact that the hip armors are connected to the knees, giving you that full power suit effect. If you have a metallic version like the one you're seeing here, you probably shouldn't transform it. If you do, make sure you pop the head off first and then pop it back on after you've transformed it. Otherwise, you can get a scratch on the helmet pretty easily that takes off that metallic coating. Also, here's my regular version of the toy. On the metallic versions, the pegs right here have a metallic coating to them, which makes them just a little thicker. And then that white bar that they pass through before locking into the rider can crack because there's just a little too much diameter there, causing stress. So it won't necessarily have to crack. If you're really careful about pushing it straight in, maybe yours won't. But I had it crack on 2 of mine, so I don't really recommend doing it. Once everything is together though, thanks to the fact that there is a peg passing through into the pelvis of the rider, that rider is locked solid in position, which is really good. That's not something you could say about the Mega House toys, where that rider kind of flops around inside. So bonus points for the design of being a powered suit and for locking that rider in position. This toy is gorgeous in armor mode, but how's it articulated? Very well. Doesn't do the best job balancing, but we'll get to that later. It has the same articulation that the rider had, but the rider's articulation was a little awkward to begin with. So when you put armor on the toy, you can have all sorts of things pop free on you and be frustrating to put back together. And then as you move things around, trying to get everything lined up and back together, you can see those knees are just popping out left and right on me. It's annoying. So there you go, that piece just fell off. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna get this toy into the pose that you think is really cool, and then you're gonna put it down and you're gonna leave it alone. And it's gonna look really cool in that pose because it can get into a whole lot of really cool poses, but it's not something you're gonna play with. One thing I do really like is how Ray's version has this gun that kind of comes up and pivots, so it can be more properly in the hand instead of just looking like it's fixed to the gauntlet. It actually looks like a functional weapon. So points for design, points for the whole power suit and all that good stuff, but not so many points for how fragile and awkward posing this toy can be. Do you need to use the included armor mode display stand? No, you don't absolutely need to. Here I've got a toy. If you do any sort of a leaning forward pose, it can stay upright. It does have the preponderance of the weight over the back of the toy though, and you have that slot in the bottom. Here's the little twig, you put it in. It can then rotate either direction. It should have just enough resistance in there to not just fall right out of place. Once it's in position, you will find handling the toy a lot less frustrating, and you can pivot that leg or that twig to be behind one of the toy's legs and make it a lot less obvious that you're using a display stand. So that's pretty helpful. So it's obviously a very limited display stand, but this toy can be pretty frustrating to handle with all the different parts that can pop off and things that come askew. So using it is highly recommended. VR52F toys come with the heavy gun, which I think is more a thing of toys and models than the actual show. This is the gun on the very first release of Stick, and it has a little bit of an issue in that it's just a hand glued on to the gun. The glue comes off very easily, just like the glue on the rest of this toy, and can make then using the gun pretty cumbersome, therefore, unless you obviously just glue it right back on, which is absolutely what you should do. Later releases, like this gun that came with the dark VR52F, has a hand that is meant to grip a gun, and it slides right off. The clear benefit of that would be that you could then take the gun and theoretically put it on a bike mode toy. using an adapter. The bummer is that CM's only included the adapter to connect this gun to the bike with VR41H yellow versions of the toy. So even though they had figured this out before they released the dark VR52F, they still didn't throw in the clip. You still had to get a yellow toy to get that clip, which is a big bummer. The good news is this hand works just as well, if not better, than the glued on hand. So that's cool. And to put it on, it's the same as any other fixed posed hand. You just pull it off, pop it on, and there you go. Now he is ready to do some invid harm, or in-bit, if we're going with the Mosquito terms. Stick looking through his heads-up display and firing his missiles is one of the more iconic elements of the show. This toy can only kind of pull that off. It does have a lowered angle, so it's actually best if you could find an aftermarket display stand, like those Fext Hobby display stands I showed you earlier. Those would help you get like a falling back and maybe making it look a little more like a horizontal shooting. You do get the scope with both the VR52F and T toys. It is a separate piece that just pegs into position. It's a nice snug fit, there it goes. And then it's pretty easy to set up Stick to look like he is lining up his shot and firing. So not a perfect implementation, but a good enough one, again, especially if you could use this display stand a little bit and get him leaning back. You do have to fiddle with it a little bit to make it look a little bit better. Again, ideal would be using a different display stand and getting sort of the jumping and firing, which is also seen several times in the show. It would make a great display. To summarize, this toy feels like a solid 1/8 scale toy design that someone shrank to 1/18 scale without removing any of the complexity. It's a toy that's much cooler in theory than it is in execution. Sure, the packaging was lame, it was light on accessories, but it wasn't crazy expensive and it looked great in both modes and the rider is well articulated. This thing has all the elements of a great success, but then you start handling it and a piece pops off here and something doesn't move the way you want it to. The gun doesn't connect on the VR52T in bike mode. Something cracks, and you realize the cost of cramming so much into a small package was durability. On the plus side, if all you want is a posable diorama, it seems unlikely anyone else is ever going to give us 13 releases to work with. On the downside, if you're looking for something fun to handle, man, there aren't many ride armor toys that fit that bill. But this one is low on the list. Check out my full article on Any Moon, subscribe to see when my Yellow and Houquet videos will drop, and thanks for watching.